Thank you, Andrea, my dear friend, for all the work you put into this. Thank you, Esther, for also your introduction, and also Pat Sullivan, who helped organize this, and Rick Young with Boise State University College of Social Sciences. Thank you for this, and of course, thank you to the Boise State University Political Science Alumni Network. I understand it's a network, it's not an association. Also, thank you to Laura Delaney, the owner of this marvelous bookstore, Rediscovered Books. This is the Gem State in Idaho, and this is a gem of a bookstore, a marvelous independent bookstore that if you're ever in Boise, you should definitely come by. And of course, thanks to C-SPAN and to the folks who hopefully are going to watch this at some point on C-SPAN's BookTV. It's a great pleasure to be here. So what I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to give a little talk about how past losing presidential campaigns have shaped the 2012 election, and then maybe do a little speculation on how the 2012 election might influence future political history in the United States. And I'm going to begin, we'll talk for about 20 minutes and open up to questions, but I'm going to begin with what I think is a pretty bold prediction, which is that on November 6th of 2012, there will absolutely and definitely be a winner and a loser. But the bold prediction is this. The thing is, we may not know for several decades who was which, because sometimes it's not clear. Sometimes the winner has almost no impact on American history. They become kind of non-entities. They're sort of inconsequential in history, where oftentimes the losing candidate will have tremendous impact on American political history and really change the political dynamics in a whole bunch of different ways. Now, before I go into that, how that works, let me tell you why I wrote the book. I was an unsuccessful political candidate myself. I ran for Congress in Wyoming in 1998. I was the Democratic nominee in a very Republican state, which shows you I'm not the brightest guy in the world anyway. I lost, and you sit there and you go, wow. That was tough. I asked all my family and my friends and complete strangers, to give me time, to give me money, to give me their talents, and then I let them down, or at least maybe the voters let me down, because I certainly remembered Mo Udall's famous quote when he dropped out of the 1976 presidential race. He said, "The voters have spoken, the bastards." And so you sort of think that way. And a little bit like Barry Goldwater. After he lost in 1964, he said, "I still believe America is a great country when anybody can grow up to be president except me." And so you worry about that, of what's happening. But you think about, did I make a difference? Did I have an impact? And, maybe a little congressional race in Wyoming was pretty minimal. I will tell you that the woman who won, the incumbent Republican, stole a few of my ideas. So I feel like I moved the ball forward a little bit. But at the presidential level, obviously, there's a chance for far greater impact. And losers are very important to the system. And there's a couple reasons. First of all, losers, particularly when they behave in a certain way, are what make democracy work. And I'm going to explain that in a little bit. And then often losing campaigns are far more dynamic and far more prophetic than a winning campaign. Now, how do they make democracy work? You may have noticed on election night that losers always get to speak first. Notice how they always on the networks, they'll declare who they think the winner is. And then we all sit around for an hour or two waiting for the guy who was declared the loser to come out and speak. And the one who won can't talk until the loser has given his concession speech. And that's because really, even though we think we know the vote totals, the fact is an election isn't over when the winner declares victory. The election's only over when the loser concedes defeat. If the loser says, I didn't lose, I was defrauded. I can't allow this guy, he's a wacko, can't be our president. You can imagine what might happen, because we see what that happen around the world all the time. In a lot of countries, people don't abide by the results of an election. And you see chaos, you see riots, you see civil war. Same year in 2008, when we had a pretty tense presidential campaign, very emotional campaign in 2008, between the first African-American president and the Republican John McCain. It's that same year in Kenya they had some elections. But the losers didn't like the results in Kenya, and so after all the violence was done, there were 1,500 people dead and 250,000 homeless. There were riots in India, which is the world's largest democracy, that killed 20. There were deaths in Mongolia and Ghana and Liberia. And you say, well, those are all third world countries. That didn't happen everywhere. In 2007, where Nicolas Sarkozy was elected president of France, they had so many riots that 80 policemen were injured. They had 600 cases of arson and 600 people arrested. So we're fortunate in the United States that we don't have violence around our presidential elections. And a lot of that is due to the behavior of the losers, because they come out and they say, I'm disappointed, but I accept the results. It's now time for our country to unify around the winner and move forward. And they have to do that because winners can only govern with the loser's consent. Again, if you're on the losing end and you say, I refuse to recognize the legitimacy of the winner, how can anything get done? You have gridlock, you have chaos, like I said, you have violence. And I think one of the reasons I wrote the book, too, at least I hope one of the messages in the book, is that I do worry that we're getting to a point, there's so much polarization, that maybe we're going to lose this wonderful tradition. You've had, especially over the last several presidencies, I think starting with Clinton, but also George W. Bush and now Obama, people are actually questioning the legitimacy of the winner. And that's a very dangerous thing for this country. We think we're a very strong democracy, but we're still a relatively young democracy. And there's no country quite as diverse as the United States in terms of having so many different ethnic groups, different regional differences. And so I actually believe our democracy in America is fairly fragile. And so it's very important that we maintain these traditions that try to keep us unified, that keep us understanding that the government may not be the government we wanted this year, but it's a legitimate government, and we'll let them govern, we'll let them do the basic elements of governing, and we'll come back the next election and try to beat them next time. But if we ever lose that, I do believe that we're going to see some terrible, terrible problems in our elections. Now, I mentioned the other way that sometimes losers have more impact than winners is that often I said losers are more prophetic than the winners. It's often the losers are the ones who come up with the new ideas, while the winners kind of sometimes are stuck in the policies of the past. In fact, I'd argue that probably every major program in our political system was begun first talked about in a losing campaign, because it takes a while for something new to gain public acceptance, because it often seems very radical and very difficult to absorb. Another way that they change things is they bring in more participants. They bring in different types of folks who maybe haven't participated in the political process before. Maybe it's the young, maybe it's minorities, maybe it's women. But they bring in new folks. They also change the coalitions and how the parties are organized. A lot of losing campaigns were the ones that changed a party from being a liberal party to a conservative party, or a conservative party to a liberal party. And the reason they do that, I think, is a couple reasons. One, first of all, underdogs have to be bold. Most of the losers sort of know they're probably going to lose. Now, they wouldn't admit that, but you know, political polling is becoming very sophisticated. And you always want it to be 1948, like Harry Truman. You come from way behind and you win. But in fact, most elections are kind of foreordained by whether there's peace and prosperity and what are the demographics. So a losing campaign sometimes has to be very bold to get people's attention. They have to talk about issues that nobody talks about, or they bring on a running mate. For example, Walter Mondale bringing Geraldine Ferraro on the ticket, or John McCain bringing Sarah Palin on the ticket. If you saw the HBO movie Game Change, that's what the whole phrase is about. That Steve Schmidt, the campaign manager, went to Senator McCain and said, we need a game changer if we're going to win this thing. Otherwise, we're going to lose. And so they went for the long pass and picked Governor Palin, and did, in fact, generate a lot of excitement for a while in that campaign. And the other thing is that, you know, if you've won, you're kind of fat and happy. You think, gee, I've got a winning message. I've done very well. I don't need to change anything. But a loser, if you've lost, you have to have some introspection and say, what did we do wrong? What can we do better the next time? And so you retool, and I think it's akin to remodeling your house. Is sometimes if you're going to make an addition, you've got to knock down some walls, sometimes all the way to the studs, rethink about what you want to do, and then rebuild. And that's what's happened. So let me just give you a few ideas of how losing campaigns have actually shaped the very basics of our political system, and then move on to sort of what this campaign and talk about some of the more recent losing presidential candidates. But I want to talk about three candidates from the 19th century who aren't very remembered very well, or sometimes misunderstood, but who in fact helped shape the very basic fundamental nature of our politics. They are the ones who determined why we have a two-party political system in the United States, why those parties are the Republicans and why those parties are the Democrats, and why one party is conservative and one party is kind of liberal. So first one I want to talk to you about is Henry Clay. I don't know how many of you know Henry Clay, but Henry Clay, let me tell you about Henry Clay. Henry Clay is perhaps the greatest American never to have become president. Now, some people may say, well, Ben Franklin, Alexander Hamilton, John Marshall, George Marshall, were all great too, but I'm going to vote for Henry Clay. Henry Clay was probably the greatest legislator in American history, and he was phenomenally important in both the House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate. He was elected Speaker of the House as a freshman on the first ballot before he even actually took the oath of office. That's how magnetic his personality was, how much his leadership qualities were instantly recognized by his peers in the House. And then he took the Speaker's job, which had been previously pretty much ceremonial, and he completely transformed it into the speakership we know today. So the Speaker of the House is now probably the second most powerful person in the American government behind the President. It wasn't always that way until Henry Clay took a hold of it. And he said, you know, actually I think, you know, the Speaker shouldn't just like open and close the legislative sessions. The Speaker should decide what legislators get on what committee, what bills go to what committee, who gets to be heard, when we're going to debate the whole bills. And so he formed the party. transformed to the office of Speaker. And he was a very effective